Boy, oh boy, I'm glad I've said allegedly so much in our last episode. Like we said, it's okay to be wrong and to change your opinion. So regarding the Justice Smollett case, let's wait for the full picture, but if we happen to be wrong about this case, we wholeheartedly apologize and wish him the best. Okay, we can start the show now. Cue.
Excuse us, ladies and gentlemen. 1, 2.
So my mum visited me this weekend in London. She spent about two days. She arrived on Friday and she just left actually. And it's quite funny because I realized that being a parent, it's like you're always on a date. They're always the one who end up paying and you don't even have the fake reach for the wallet because the kids just don't pay. And worst thing is, even when they're a teenager, the money that they would have in their wallet, it's basically the money that you gave to them. That really sucks. That's what I thought.
It's so funny you mentioned that because I thought about that yesterday. I was having lunch with my mom in a brasserie next to my place in Paris, and she automatically paid, but I never thought twice about it. But very recently, I got a new contract at my work, which means I now make more money than my mom does. And so the fact that she just gave the card to pay, it really struck me as because I really anticipated that I would pay, but she didn't even think about it. I think you will never be able to pay for your parents unless it's their anniversary or something, or you take them out yourself. I think it's anchored in their parents' DNA or something.
I think you can always try and pay for an ice cream. This is not, too much for them. They're like, oh, that's nice.
An ice cream?
But then when you try to escalate from that, you're like, but maybe I could pay for lunch. They're like, no, it's not happening. Or they don't even say no. They just do it. They're like, oh yeah, sure. That's nice of you to ask or to do that for me, right? But then the minute you try to pay, you just realize that they've already paid for the meal before you arrived at the restaurant or something. It's like,
yeah, exactly.
How
I do
did
that.
you do
I
it?
do this tricky thing sometime when I want to pay for friends and I know they won't let me.
You did that to me actually, and I was
Right.
really shocked. One day I was like,
How to do that?
how is that possible?
Wasn't it for your birthday when you were in Japan, in Tokyo? Oh no.
No, that was me.
No, that's not the you did that. Yeah.
No, in Japan I was like, it felt like I was in a drunken state. This is
Right.
her
You
birthday.
were in a drunken state.
I was
I mean, my best friend Tomodachi, mixing Japanese English words. She had literally asked the guy, "Give me your best sake," and the guy came back. I'm not kidding you. The guy came back with a frozen bamboo, filled up with sake, and he put it on the table, and we looked at each other like, well.
I was so scared because I was in my mind comparing it to your best wine in France. And I was like, I'm broke.
Yeah.
That's it. That's my undoing.
Thank God that was only their best sake. It was only that. Imagine if they brought something 100 years old, made by a samurai or something.
So yeah, I was a little bit scared, but then it was okay because it was the equivalent actually of a brasserie in France. So it wasn't that expensive, and we managed in the end, or at least I managed.
And it was a super great night, and we had really great food. It just took us 45 minutes to find the place. Do you remember?
Oh my God.
We were going insane because the place was free advertising. The place is called 35 Steps Bistro, and it's Shibuya, Tokyo. And we were looking everywhere, knowing that in Japan, Korea, sometimes you have restaurants that are several floors of the same building. So we're checking all the labels, checking all the floors, trying to find it, and we're going insane. And then we noticed this really, really creepy looking staircase, the kind of staircase that leads to an underground parking. And we're like, nah, that can't be the place.
That can be.
And we went down, and that was the place. That was the place, yes.
Wait, you know what? I took Claire there on our first day back in Japan.
Yeah, that was so good.
Yeah, but there's always something going on in there because when we went there, the waiter was obsessed with a flamethrower, but for food, not a real flamethrower, but I mean, the thing you can use on creme brulee or whatever. And the guy was using it so much, I was like, is he obsessed with fire? What is going on? Oh my God. Anyways.
Yeah.
I had an anecdote, but I have to say that I'm not alone at my place right now, and I don't know why I feel shy talking, because the person keeps trying to feed me like chips and making me drink ananas juice, pineapple juice, so I'm a little bit self-conscious. But my anecdote is that I catch myself thinking very often of a specific video, and I think we've all seen it and we've all been shocked by it. You remember the video, guys, where there's a lizard running like crazy through the desert, and he overcomes so many obstacles, and he ends up in a snake nest. Sorry, Muriel, but he's in a snake nest. He ends up being chased by like so many snakes.
Oh yeah, the biggest one.
Just runs for his life, and then he and all the snakes jumps after him, and he make it like safely on the other side. And I think about this video so often, it's insane. And because I think this lizard is like so much more accomplished than any of us. Like, this shit is routine for him. Because like it's like for us it's like the run of his life, but for him it's any Tuesday, you know, it's like life in the desert, you know. So I started thinking about the way animals they lead their lives, and it's like fucking like meta shit. It's crazy. You're always like hunted, chased. Anywhere you go, like, you know, under any rock there could be a scorpion or some snake. You know, you have death every second after you. And I think they're fucking hardcore.
It's not accomplishment. It's living in fear.
Yeah, but they survive. That's the accomplishment. It's
Wait,
so accomplished,
first of
this lizard.
all, when you said every Tuesday, I had the song "The Club's Going Up" on a Tuesday. I was like picturing this, like this lizard being like
up on a Tuesday. Yeah, that's him.
Exactly. But also it was a BBC documentary, and they made it like an action scene. You remember that?
Yeah,
that was the BBC like is crazy. Like they're so talented though.
This video was masterpiece. Like, better than any action movie, any Marvel, anything. Like, so much suspense. We were all rooting. Like, you can make a series 3 seasons. You would not have the support for the main character as much as we all supported this lizard. It was insane.
First of all, calm down. It's not Game of Thrones or whatever.
It is better than that.
Second of all, the fact that you said Scorpio instead of Scorpion killed me too. I was like, Scorpio.
English is on holiday.
Like, we know what your priorities are at this point. Anyways, I don't really have an anecdote for this week. It's just a rant. So I've recently rewatched the movie Whiplash from Damien Chazelle, because my memory of it was fuzzy at best, and I hated it. Like, I hated it. I can now say that Damien Chazelle is like one of the directors that I hate the most in this world. Like, seriously. Like, I hate him. Like, to all my friends and family to whom I said I liked it before, I'm sorry I lied. Honestly, if I did, it's either because I was too lazy to argue with you, or you seem to really enjoy it, and I didn't want to bum you out, but that ends now. I've said it. I don't want to discuss it, like, further, and I don't want to say why it's bad, because I know you're just gonna scream at me, and I don't have time for that. Like, I don't want that energy in my life, but I'll just link an amazing YouTube video of a musician explaining the technical errors of the movie in layman's terms. So go check it out on our website for all our sources also, and it's on missingsoundspodcast.com. This is a free plug, first of all, but also, yeah, go check that video, because the guy is amazing and he's actually talented, unlike Damien Chazelle. So yeah, that's
That's such a free ranting. That's so free, Muriel, because you won't even explain the whys. It's just like, I hate it, accept it. Which I accept. I didn't even heard of the movie before, I have to say. Like, you know me, I'm not aware of anything. Oh my god, so.
Leah, come on! Like...
Apparently I didn't miss anything. Once again, I didn't miss anything, so fine.
I watched this movie a couple years ago. I think it's back on Netflix now, but I haven't watched it in a while, so I don't even want to comment it. Whatever you feel.
Thank you for validating everything I just said.
Don't validate her so easily, Claire.
It's not even validating. I'm just saying, like, I have no opinion and I have no genuine interest in rewatching this movie.
You say, I have no opinion, and Muriel literally said, thank you for validating me, and I was like, what? Nobody validated you, anything.
She validated me, but behind the scenes, so we know. We've talked about it behind the scenes. Anyways, so welcome to Missing Sounds. I'm one of your hosts, Muriel Vincent, and I'm here with my two best friends, Claire Kinge and Leah Nakash. Thank you for joining us. Here's the rundown for this week's episode. Gentrification is the new black. All over the world, urban, underprivileged neighborhoods that were formerly deemed of no interest are now coveted by a plethora of economic players with different agendas. Where some consider the phenomenon as only natural, the displaced populations and the ones who are threatened soon to be see it as something to eschew by all means in order to preserve a social and economical mix. From Paris to New York to London, we try to get a comprehensive overview from recent news as well as from our own experiences on rising land values and what it entails for people.
Yeah, I really wanted to talk about this because I think everybody is concerned by it. We all live in major cities. I know you, Muriel, used to live in New York City, so you know what I'm talking about when I'm talking about gentrification. There you live in Paris and I live in London, so we all concerned by it. Yeah. It's pretty bad, and I really wanted to talk about it because recently I was on my Twitter feed and I landed on this article. Yeah, it was in New York Times. It was about Grenfell Tower. So for people who don't know, but I think that pretty much everybody knows because it was all over the news. There was this major blaze in this council flat in South Kensington. So it's one of the most affluent boroughs in London. And it happened about a year and a half ago. It was in July 2017, if I remember correctly. And in this article, they were saying that there were still consequences until today in the aftermath of this blaze, that you could see that there were still lots of toxic component around the whole site, and lots of inhabitants in the tower complained actually of the whole situation, saying it was bad, and they were vomiting because the air is like so polluted, which is crazy. And I think it speaks loads about the whole London housing situation. I mean, between the people who got evicted by the flat because of the blaze and they still don't have any houses, how you have this major council flat that is in one of these most affluent borough but was built with very poor material, and how the council is trying to regenerate some of those council flats to make it more beautiful. And you know that it's just this guy's thing to just attract people who are more affluent in those boroughs to make it even more gentrified than it is now. So it's all those kind of things that I wanted to discuss, and I just wanted you guys to tell me your story about your cities or the cities that you lived in.
Maybe, Claire, you could explain first, like, your take on London?
So, I've been living in London for almost 3 years now, and I think most people know that it's one of the most expensive cities in Europe. I can't even say EU now because we're out because of Brexit, which sucks. But it's really expensive, and it means that most people that I know who are in their 20s live in a flat shares. Not because we all think that it's cool. I think most of us would like to have the opportunity, if we could, to live in one bedroom flat, but we just can't afford it. Meaning that lots of people live in flat share with 3 or 4 people. So here in London, the rent is crazy, and you have more and more homeless people. You can see, I think that there is 170,000 homeless people in London. This is a study that Shelter did. Shelter is this association, this charity that helps people who have temporary accommodation, because you know when we talk about homeless, it's not just people who are sleeping in the streets, but it's also people who have temporary accommodation or live in hostels because they just can't afford rent here in London. So this is kind of the situation in London, and everybody wants to live in the city center, more or less. Especially with the Greater London, you have like lots of different neighborhoods which before were a bit, I won't say like squalor, but people didn't really want to live there. But now, because the city center is so packed, that you have more and more people living in those neighborhoods, which before were not deemed to be the hip place, if it makes sense.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is the London situation.
Claire, just to follow on what you just said, I think the main difference between Paris and London is that Paris is so much smaller. I don't know how accurate it is, but I remember reading that it was more than 10 times smaller. And so the main problem when you have such a small city with such a high density of population, because basically the demand for housing on Paris is unlimited. Like, you have so many people who want to live here, French and foreign. Because also the problem of France, it's like so centered on Paris. So you have so many people who maybe studied in the province, etc., but who end up like working here. And it's such a small area and very few new construction compared to other European or worldwide cities that it's deemed to be completely unaffordable. And I read that since 1997, the rents have more than tripled. It's absolutely insane. We are above 14,000 euro the meter square here. It's so ridiculous. And there's so many different reasons for that, but the gentrification is also happening. I think it's not as flagrant as in cities as New York or London, but you start seeing it especially in the northern neighborhoods. In Montmartre, it's very clear with now the La Marque Colincourt, which is really, really hip now, and it starts to slowly eat up all those historically poorer neighborhoods, if I can say, like La Goutte d'Or or Place de Clichy or very famously Barbès. And you see more and more young students, hipster people, if I can say, moving on in those neighborhoods and literally pushing away the poorer working class of Paris. I think it's simply unaffordable to live here if you're not some kind of from privileged background, unless you're in HLM in France. It's social housing, but the number of social housing in Paris are really ridiculously low. We did have a new law in 2013 that made it obligatory for all cities in France to have at least 25% of their housing offers to be social housing. But I've not seen so much of a difference, because actually most cities would rather pay the very high fine that they have to pay to not comply to this law, rather than actually build those social housing. What do you think, Muriel?
I don't exactly agree with you, actually. Well, I mean, with the gist of what you said, yes, of course, but for the social housing situation in Paris, I'm not saying it's stellar. It could be better. It can always be better, but there's a lot of apartments or houses here in Paris where you do not know it's a social housing, because it's, first of all, rude to ask people, hey, by the way, but also it was built in a way to foster social mix. So you can have like a regular apartment, and then like your neighbor is in a social housing kind of situation. So, but you don't know it, because if you just look at the building, you wouldn't say, like, it doesn't necessarily have a look, you know?
Yes, but in the French case, from what I read and also I know, is that those social housing apartments in complex that are not social housing are for public servants. It's public social housing that are only available for people in certain jobs. It's not on the private market.
Yeah,
it's true, actually. Now that you mention it, I think that one of my brother's friend, like the father's friend, works in this government body. I can't remember which one. And thanks to that, he had like a really, really good flat in Paris, and he would pay like a very, very affordable rent.
Yes.
Because I would remember that he graduated almost at the same time as my brother, and I knew more or less they have the same background, that he couldn't make as much money as his flat would suggest. And I was like,
So it's typically if you work for the city hall, if you work for the police, if you work for like
because for example, my flat is in this situation, but it's not about social housing. It's just that, for example, the employer of my father, they bought several buildings in Paris or the Paris region, and it belongs to them, and so they have an affordable rent for their employees. And yes, you're right about the whole public service.
But it's considered social housing.
Actually, it's not. I think we're not talking about the same thing. Like, yes, you have these, like you said, if you're a civil servant, you'll have these apartments locked for you, but it's the same with private companies also, or at least like for my dad, it's like a semi public company, but it's not considered social housing. So it really depends. So it's not the same to have these apartments on lockdown for your employees.
Okay, because and I would really make the difference here between private and public company, because if it's a public company, if it's a state body, it is considered, at least from what I read on
but it's semi-public, on
different sources, it was considered, I'm not specifically talking about your case, but it is considered social housing because you're socially helping people to afford apartments in cities or neighborhood they could not normally afford due to their salaries, and it's perks of being a public servant. It's especially true like for when Claire mentioned some apartment being social housing and some apartment being absolutely private real estate. So it's really the case in those instances.
But then maybe in this case, I don't know if it was those flats which were on lockdown because of his father job or whatever. I have no idea, but it's just something that I remember when you mentioned that. I was like, wait, I think I know someone, those kind of things. But I think that social housing, whether it's in Paris or in London, in my opinion, I feel like it's not easy to get. You have like a really, really long waiting list. And I was reading about that because you know that it's going to be a new mayoral election next year in London. And like the actual mayor is from Labour, so Sadiq Khan, and housing is definitely one of the policy that it's on the agenda because lots of people have been complaining, and I think we're quite right. And like lots of people are on the waiting list, even like on whole England, even though I speak mainly about London because London is like a bit like Paris in a way, where London is the center of the British economy, and I mean everything's happening here. Even though you have Manchester that it's a bit cool and hip right now, most people, if they want to work, they have to move to London. There are not so many people who are like born and bred in London. Lots of English people who are here, they all come from somewhere else. So yeah, anyway, I mean like the waiting list is like super long. And I was reading this article that the willingness for social housing was about 1 million people or something like that. There were like 1 million people who were asking in all Britain for social housing, and there were like just 200,000 social homes available, which is like a huge gap. So it means that basically lots of people are waiting for this.
You can wait decades for one. And also I want to attract to the fact that it's not necessarily like humble people that have access to social housing, because you have different kind, at least in Paris, that's how it works. You have different ranks. And even if you win, like, let's say a totally like acceptable wage that is close to, I don't know, 2,600 euro per month, as a single individual, you could get access to some of the higher category, if I can say, of social housing. So it's more middle class than poorer class also in Paris.
It really depends, because that's also my mom's work. And it really depends on your situation. Like if you're, let's say, a single mother with several kids and you're not working or whatever, you will get this accommodation.
Of course, but you have different categories like A, B, C, D, and D are from a certain level of salary. So therefore, like, I don't want to say rich, but richer people, you can't, even if you're on social housing list, you can't get any social housing. There's category inside that.
Of course. But I mean, so I do agree more people should get access to them. I'm also like, you have to have these categories. Anyways, guys, I would like to maybe take it to New York, because we've talked about London and Paris for quite a while. I'm not saying we shouldn't talk about it anymore, because I would also like to hear comparisons, but I would like to maybe talk about my experience while I was in New York, because this, for me, it's less about social housing and more about gentrification. I was so shocked to see it so clearly, because like Leah said earlier, it's not as definite in Paris, at least. And when I was in New York, I was staying in Williamsburg, which is a neighborhood from the Brooklyn borough, and it's so hipster. Like, Leah was there, she witnessed this. It's like, so a lot of young, cool professionals in their like mid-20s to 30s maybe. Like, and I was kind of like, what is happening? Because I remember, you know, I know it's gonna sound cliche, but the Jay-Z albums, like talking about Brooklyn, I was like, are you sure? Like, of course, I know, like, I'm just being playful here. Like, I know that they did such a good work, I would say, in terms of renovations and stuff in New York. But at the same time, I was kind of like, okay, but where are the people who were living there in the first place? Because from what I'm seeing, it's none of the original population, right? And it was also the case in Harlem. It's actually quite flagrant in Harlem. And I've read a study on it. And basically, the way it started for Harlem was through these neighborhood congregations that really were pointing out how in bad shapes all these apartments and buildings were, and how it wasn't livable for people there, and that a lot of families had to move out of Harlem because the crime was so prevalent there. And so the city decided to do something about it, but by renovating all of these buildings, they just seized that opportunity to just push people out. They were like, you know what? If we're going to invest in something nicer, you're not going to be part of it. And yes, the crime did drop out. And at first, the families that left came back. And then there was what they called, it's not gentrification, but it's Disneyfication, which means that along with the buildings that were like the newer buildings or the renovated buildings, businesses were also coming either back or just started to flourish in these neighborhoods that historically didn't have them. But it means that local businesses were once more like pushed out because they just couldn't afford the rent because of the rising land values. So I feel that it's really interesting to see how it was an initiative from the people wanting to lead a better life. And in the end, you had all these economical players that just basically, they forced their own agendas on these people. And now when you look at Harlem these days, it's not like, it will always be a center for Black culture. But now you have like the Black Harlem and the Latinx Harlem, etc., etc. Like, it's not the same, and you can clearly see the gentrification of it. So that's quite sad to me, because people were really stressed out about it. You can like hear at every brunch people talking about gentrification, either in New York or in other cities like San Francisco. It's crazy like how people are affected by it, and they are so scared of losing their culture and what makes these great places, you know, these great places, which are the people, you know?
I agree with you, because I was in New York last summer as well, and I was in Brooklyn, and I was in Harlem as well, because Harlem is part of Manhattan. I think it was a matter of time since it became gentrified, because Manhattan is the center island, so it kind of makes sense for people to invest in Harlem because it's Manhattan, it's like the real city center. I think that I felt definitely more the gentrification in Brooklyn in some part, and with my sister we stayed in Bed-Stuy. So yeah, we stayed there. I think there you still see like lots of African American people, like you could see some. And it's so cool because like you would walk in the street and they would just like nod at you as like you're one of us, although I'm like so not one of them, but anyways. But the more you would go towards Williamsburg, as you said, like you would have like the Orthodox Jewish neighborhood, and then you would see like all those white people riding their bike with like their kale smoothies and all the stuff. So you would see like the shift. I think what's interesting in a way with gentrification, it's always the most vulnerable population that are gonna pushed away. It's like as if the city would say, oh, we're gonna revamp those buildings and we're gonna make it better for you guys, people who actually live there. But whenever the building is finished and it's all brand new, actually they just kick people out, and then they just put new tenants who have more means, more money, and then next thing you know, you have like a cafe or brunch place next to your place, and people are just pushed out. So it's kind of sad that you see that the most vulnerable population, I'm not gonna say like they're always people from minorities, but most most of the time they are like black people, or I don't know, Middle Eastern, if we think about Barbès or North Africans in Paris. And those are the people who in the end up being displaced and having to live in the outer skirt of the city.
That I didn't quite understand in New York was that, you know, when Leah was saying, for example, earlier that the scarcity of the land in Paris is real, it's not necessarily the case in New York, because there's no, when you compare in terms of figures, there's not that many people. Like, the way it's distributed on all the boroughs, it's not that much when you compare it to like London or Paris in the end, you know what I mean? And also, like, when you compare it to Paris, where it's really difficult to build because we also have this cultural marker that is, well, the most beautiful city in the world. So the minute you want to build something, you have to really think about it, because people are going to get pissed either way. It's not the same as in New York, when you can just build another skyscraper or whatever. Like, I'm not saying it's that easy, but you know what I mean. You know what I mean?
Yeah. You have regulation here, even for the heights of buildings and the color of the curtains. And thank God we have, or else we'll look like London, and that would be a disaster.
I knew you would say something like a job at London at some point. But yeah, and so
I think it looks like thank God, because imagine you build a building and in front of you they build a building 10 floors higher. Like, imagine the nightmare. You can't even see the sky. So I'm very glad we have all this very strict. Like,
I'm gonna jump on this and take the defense of London. I'm sorry, Leah.
I mean, I'm sorry, out of Westminster, even Prince Charles said it. They sold London to the constructors. They sold it. Like, you could build anything you want. And it looks, I'm sorry, outside the historic, like, it's not a good looking city. You have to admit, like, when you have view from the sky of London, I'm sorry, it's not an attractive city. It looks like a bit.
But I think it's true that there are like lots of constructions everywhere. Everybody will tell you that whenever you walk in London, you see always skyscrapers being built, whether in the city or somewhere else. But then you also have like some historical landmarks. If you go to Notting Hill, they also have this really strict code of rule where you have like, you cannot paint your house from a certain color or whatever. It's quite regulated, and it also depends on the neighborhood you would go. I would say that I think West London is much nicer than East London overall, but you also have like kind of signature architecture with the Victorian houses. You have a bit of everything, and as much as I cannot say that it's as beautiful as Paris, but it's just different, and you have like lots of different vibe, whether you would like something that it's more Victorian or something that it's more modern, or if you like brick houses, you have like lots of different stuff, and I think it's part of the rich.
Historic. Yeah, it's part of the historic architecture of London. But I'm talking about the new stuff, like they build like from the 90s. It's absolutely. I'm sorry, it's not nice. It's not nice building. You can do modern building that look very sharp and very nice, like in Barcelona they did.
Yeah,
in London, I'm sorry, it's a mix up of everything, and like their famous building that looks like I don't even know how to say it in English, but you know, the suppositoire building.
Yeah, but
what
Leah,
the fuck is this?
Let's calm.
It's really.
Wait.
It's really
Wait, let's calm
don't like
down,
it at
because
all.
first of all, you do know that, especially for buildings, it's so subjective. I'm not saying I'm not on you with this. It's not exactly my taste, but I'm just saying that you remember then when Haussmann in Paris builded everything, people were like, it's ugly. And I'm like, what are you saying? Shut up.
No. He removed. No, they didn't say it's ugly. He bulldozed everything that was totally
We know that.
unsanitary, and like people were living like really. But it was not. Anyone said it was ugly. Like from the beginning, everybody did like.
I swear to God, Leah, people were saying
were there at the time.
that it was ugly. Not everybody, obviously, but like a lot of people were like, it's just not my taste. And then with time, then people were like, oh, you know what?
No, of course, but like you have to see what they bulldozed down. Like Paris was really a dirty, absolutely
I'm not saying
horrible
it
city
was
at the time. Like
not. I'm just saying that taste evolved.
yeah, and
also.
but what was their style? With Versailles, old Versailles in Paris, it must have been like nobility, like again being like
Yeah, I
their
know, but
usual
I'm
selves.
just saying that
But it was like it was very innovative, like in terms of like urban planning and at all ages, every time something is new, it's always like bad, but that's why I guess that's what happened at the time. But what I was seeing like more especially in London is like they had really like loose regulation as to who and why and how they could build, and it resulted in very, very ugly building.
It also depends. It also depends.
It has to be said.
It also depends when it
was
built, because I mean, let's be honest. You have some decades where they just built ugly stuff in general. Like, yeah, because when you look at, for example, public transportation, and you look at the seats and this kind of carpet design, it's so ugly in every city of Europe. And you're like, this is the 80s. This is the 80s, people. This ugly shit, this is the 80s. And so you just know. Yeah.
Muriel, I can just hear the disgust in your voice when you said carpet 80s. It was just like, I'm gonna barf.
You know what I mean? And you know my history with public transportation if you listen to last week's episode. So, yeah.
I didn't even say, I'm gonna jump on that and try to defend London. That's ugly.
It is.
That's ugly. Everybody knows that.
But also, Claire, I'm just thinking about, I'm bringing it back to New York again, but when you said, in Bed-Stuy, I've seen some African-American people or whatever, you know what? Bed-Stuy is kind of one of the last places in Brooklyn that is not gentrified yet. And it's gonna be soon.
Yeah, I think it is.
Because I've had a friend who lived there and she told me that she could hear like gunshot, and I was like, in New York? Like, I was so surprised. And she was like, yeah, and it was in Bed-Stuy. It's like, it's gonna be gone soon. And it's awful to say, but let's be honest about it. It is. And also, I've met a guy when my brother was here to visit, that told me, like, he was an African-American guy, and he told me that yes, right now he was living in Williamsburg, but he also lived in Flatbush, he lived in Bed-Stuy, he lived in even Queens, in Astoria, he lived basically in the Bronx, like everywhere. So even though you see these people, just know that they had to move a lot because of all these processes, basically.
But you know what makes me sad as well? Because I'm talking about that and everything, but I feel like I'm also participating in a way in gentrification in London. Because let's be honest, I'm a French citizen and I live in northwest London in this neighborhood that is still quite, affordable and all those things, but I see a lot of young professionals, even though like right now it's quite mixed. You have Africans, North Africans, Middle Eastern people, a bit of Polish, and it's a huge mix, but I work in the digital media industry and all stuff, and I certainly participate to the gentrification, and I just love how my the letting agency, the one that lets me rent this place, with my flatmate, decided that they will increase the rent again this year. And for now, I feel I'm lucky. I'm not paying too much, but I was talking with one of my friends who lives in London, and she lives towards Dalston, and she was saying that she paid almost £1,000 per month for a flat share, although she lives like with 3 other people. Okay, her bedroom she has an ensuite bedroom, but it's still a lot.
Can you confirm a story I heard, which is now not only do you have flat share, but you have a room share and you have bed share. Like, people will stay in the same bed and pay a rent on that.
So I've never done this, but I know that there are room share. There are people who do double room, and you have two single bed in a room. But then I'm like, I think it's too much, to be honest. I would never do that, but there are people who do, and because they really can't afford anything else, I guess. But then it's funny because people are like, oh my god, there are so many homeless now. And I'm just like, look at the rent, people. It's just going crazy, and then you wonder why there are so many homeless people in the street. It's not as bad as in Paris, but I can see that there's been an increase. On my street, I see like lots of homeless, and it's kind of sad because some of them, you just know them because they're there all the time. And I can see like the changes since I've moved here. So about 3 years ago, even though everybody's like, oh, the UK, the unemployment is only 5%, there are still lots of people sleeping on the street, lots of rough sleepers, and the number of homeless people increased despite the good unemployment rate. So it's
guys,
kind of alarming.
I think we should wrap up. But I just wanted to go back on what you said about you being a part of gentrification. I get what you said that, and yes, it's kind of the case in a way, but don't also forget that in every cities that we've mentioned, I really do think that in general, it's just a case of a bad social mix kind of policy. Like, I feel like it doesn't work. And so instead of trying to accommodate everybody, which is the city and the government job in general, I feel like they're just trying to push some people out and push people in. Like, that's crazy. And so, yes, you belong to a category of people, like you said, like young professionals who can kind of afford still this kind of lifestyle. But at the same time, you should exist, and you are as valid as someone who's been there from the get-go, who historically was raised in London, and he's maybe a little less privileged than you. But it shouldn't be one or the other. It should be both at the same time. And it's not our job to, on a podcast, think of how can we make that happen. Actually, it's our, elected people, like, they should do this job, and they're not doing it. And people are fighting against finding a viable solution.
I agree with you in the sense that I do believe it's a deliberate political decision, that the bad housing regulation we had in all different countries are responsible for the houses crisis we have now. Also, Claire, I want to comfort you, like, you're in a flat share and I'm in like 25 meter square studio. And I'm paying a ridiculous amount for it. Like, we're struggling, like, in Brussels, which is like one of the rarest cities in Europe, or where housing is very decent, like in Berlin. For what I pay, I would get a 3-bedroom penthouse with a garden on the rooftop. Like, let's be serious. So we pay enormous prices for like a ridiculous house. Like, so that's the saddest part about all this. I just want to move out, but all the jobs are here.
Yeah,
it's crazy.
The wrap up is just us being like, do fucking something about it. Like, seriously.
Do something.
Yeah, please.
I'm 25. Please. I want a bedroom. I don't want to sleep in my living room kitchen anymore.
Oh, like, my God.
I want a bedroom with a bed.
That's us calling out all of these, elected people. Like, you're not doing enough. We're coming onto you people. Like, we know where you live. Now, this is not a threat. I'm kidding. Like, no, please don't sue us. But I knew you would do that.
It is a threat. You know.
This is why we're gonna end up in jail because of you. Just because of you.
I can already see the headlines, millennials trying to threaten political officials.
Well, this is the show, apparently. Thank you guys for tuning in, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
See you next week.
This podcast was brought to you by Claire Kingay, Leanna Cash, and Muriel Vincent. All the sources and other materials mentioned during the show can be found on our website, missingsoundspodcast.com. If you like this episode and want to support the show, please leave us a review on iTunes or anywhere you might be listening to this podcast. You can slide in our DMs on Twitter at missing_sounds with a Z. For business inquiries, please visit missingsoundspodcast.com. Our music is by David Cutter and Joao Neves. The Missing Sounds jackets and visuals are by Ewa Kamczyc. Thank you for tuning in, and take care, guys. Peace!